Hi, I'm Alan Nelson, owner and operator of Abbey Repair. I've been fixing sewing machines, sergers, and embroidery machines for over 20 years and teaching people how to use them. Today I'd like to go through lubrication. Lubrication is something that I get so many questions about. What should I lubricate? How often should I lubricate it? I constantly have people say, it was running great when I put it away, or I haven't used it since it was last oiled. And today I'd like to show you what happens to oil and grease over time. The solvents that keep it running evaporate out, and what it leaves behind, the paraffin or the other molecules in synthetic grease that stick around after the solvents evaporate, make things as hard as bar soap, as hard as candle wax. This machine has been sitting in the closet for 15 years, and the owner called me up and said, I don't understand why my presser foot doesn't want to go up and down. And if your presser foot doesn't move up and down very easily, because it has to every single stitch, you get really short stitches, you get knotting of the thread underneath the needle plate, all kinds of bad things can happen. So today I want to pull this machine apart and get some good close-ups for you so that you can really see what happens to old oil and grease. And you don't have to use it. It's not that you're wearing it out, it's that the solvents evaporate and they leave behind paraffin or some other synthetic filler that companies are putting in their products these days. And that stuff just, it gets as hard as bar soap. It starts acting like an adhesive instead of a lubricant. And I'm going to pull this apart and show you that. So without further ado, let's take some pieces off. When you lubricate a machine, the first thing that you want to do is clean it and get all the lint out of the way. And when you look in here, you can see that there's a lot of lint and really a lot of dust bunnies in here that are here because it's just never been used. But when you go to lubricate it, everywhere where metal touches metal and it moves, or even metal touches plastic and it moves, or every bearing where it spins in the back or the front of these upper and lower horizontal shafts, you want to put oil in all of those, and you want to put grease in all of your gears. The other place that they put grease in this machine is they put it in the presser foot linkage. I've got a number 15 Torx that removes this screw, and then after pulling off this spring, loosen that screw and gently pull out the upper tensioner. Here, when I look at my upper tensioner, I can see again this old grease that's in here that's just flaking off. I like to make sure I get all of that removed before I put it back together. This check spring needs to move freely, and there's a lot of garbage on there that needs to be cleaned off. I'll even come in with an old toothbrush. These work great for cleaning that stuff up. And then I'll put, again, a drop of oil on that spring so that it moves just very, very, very freely. There it comes. Very freely. This is your shock absorber for the thread. Each single stitch that your machine does that needs to move very, very, very freely. And then we get in here and we see that this, which is supposed to move effortlessly, has got this grease on it that isn't really grease anymore. It's really stiff and sticky, and it just isn't letting things move the way that it's supposed to. So we've got to get all of that old grease off, all of that old oil out of there. And this is the spring that it pushes down. And again, this isn't slippery like oil and grease are supposed to be. It's really sticky. So we need to clean all of that off. And I even take an X-Acto knife and spin that gear to get as much of that old grease loosened up as I can, so that I can get it out of there before I put this back together. I'll take a pointer, put it in the end of this spring, and then work that spring up and down a little bit inside there, putting a little bit of outward pressure on that. Not a lot, just a little, so that it cleans all of that old grease out so that there isn't any grease left inside there. Then I'm going to go in with just my scraper and my hook end, and I'm going to pull out all of this old hard stuff, and this grease on here, this is so hard it just scrapes off and flakes away. There isn't any solvent left in this at all. I scrape off all of this that I can, because it really isn't grease anymore. It's more of an adhesive compound. And then I come in here and the same thing all around these parts. They put this grease when they manufactured it, and it isn't grease anymore. Now it's as hard as bar soap, and it needs to all be cleaned out before putting oil on it is really going to help it. On the needle bar, you see here where there's this line. This line is old oil that lint has stuck to. But that old oil, that old lubricant line is, again, it's as hard as bar soap, and that's got to be removed. I'm going to pull the light bulb out here so I can actually get behind there and see what's going on. I want to come down in here and I want to get all of this scale away from this piece. I want to get all of this scale. That's just old grease. You see the way that's flaking away? That's old grease. Right here, all that old grease. It's so hard, it just flakes off. This is thread that's actually wrapped real tight inside the linkage here, and that needs to come out of there. In order to get that out, this linkage has to come apart. It's a rather long process. I won't bore you with that. Once all of that's done, I like to take the hand wheel and turn that hand wheel and just physically see in here, where do things move? Every place where metal moves against metal, or there's an axle in the middle of a bearing, you want to get oil in and around that so that it really has an opportunity to move as freely as it can. I like to think of oil and grease as the elixirs of the gods for sewing machines. You put them on there, you put it on there on a regular basis every 2 to 3 years before it has a chance to dry out, and everything keeps running smooth. Another thing that we want to make sure that we keep lubricated is the bobbin winder, and we want to lubricate the pivot shaft. We also want to lubricate the bearing that the bobbin winder itself goes through. And this is supposed to spin freely, and it's spinning freely now because I loosened it up a little. But when you spin this, you can see where it turns in this bearing in here. And you want to put a little bit of oil on either side of that bearing. Be careful not to get any on the rubber that runs against the hand wheel to wind it. But over here on your pivot shaft, you want to make sure your pivot shaft and pivot arm get lubricated. And back in here, you've got the other upper horizontal shaft bearing right underneath here. Make sure you get both sides of that. And then there's a clutch in this device, and this clutch needs to come apart periodically, and that needs to get cleaned and lubed. There's a lot of little pieces in there. We're not going to take that apart in this video. Then we want to move down to here, and this is something that needs to be lubricated fairly regularly, probably every 4 to 6 hours of use, maybe even more than that if you're doing heavy use with it. Down here you have your inner hook and your outer hook. And the inner hook sits in a little ridge and is guided so that it can't wobble back and forth by a ridge that's in the outer hook, so that everything stabilizes and it centers. And that ridge, you need to have oil on that, and you can put oil on it by moving the hand wheel until you can see the little gap right at the hook itself. You can see the gap and you can see that ridge right in here. So just put a half a drop of oil on there periodically. If it's sat in the closet for a long time, put some oil on there before you even start and turn the hand wheel. I want to make sure that there's oil in every one of these pivots, every one of these bearings. I want there to be fresh lubricant in there. Everywhere down in here, when you turn that hand wheel, everything where you see something pivots or something spins, you want to clean the old oil and grease out of there, clean all of the lint out, and make sure that you re-oil every one of those parts. I want to put some grease on the gears and also on the shaft right here. This shaft is what controls the feed dogs. When this is in a right position, the feed dogs are down. When it's in a left position, the feed dogs are up. And this cam inside here is what makes those feed dogs go up and down when this is engaged. We want to make sure there's some grease on that. One more thing that I want to show you about lubricating this machine is the bobbin case, because the bobbin case should get cleaned and lubricated too. And to do that, I'm going to pull the bobbin out. We don't need to get any lubricant on the thread, but when I move this little lever, I move it and things inside here are spring-loaded and things move, and they need to move very freely down here too. So I'm going to take a minute and put a little bit of lubrication on those slides on the bobbin case to make sure they move the way that they're supposed to. Then I'll work that back and forth a little bit, get that oil moving back and forth on those slides like it should. Now we're going to switch to another machine that's a little more basic than this, and we'll go through and show you what a well-maintained machine looks like and why you want to have a well-maintained machine. I just finished putting new gears in and freeing up all the linkages in this machine, lubricating everything that needed lubricating, and I want to show you what a machine should look like and how things should move once you get done. What I'd like to do first is just show you what these old gears look like. First, this is a metal rim on here, and it's got plastic injection molded onto it. And those plastic teeth just get filled with all the hard grease and lint over time. And the reason that these are the color they used to be white, but they discolor with time and they get brittle. And you can see here where some of the teeth of this gear actually just snapped right off because it was brittle. So what I do when I refurbish these machines is the first thing I do is I go through the entire machine and clean everything and lubricate everything and free up all of the linkage. And then I go in here and I put these, take out the old gears and put these new gears in, and I grease the gears. I lubricate every pivot point on this machine. Everywhere where metal touches metal and things move, have either grease or oil, whichever one is appropriate for the job. So that when I turn that hand wheel, everything in here moves just as freely as it's supposed to. The slides, all of the old oil and grease I've pulled out of there, freed everything up. On the bottom, as well as on the top. And on the top, a lot of these old Singers, and there's a lot of these machines around, they have a worm gear that drives the cam stack up inside here. And that worm gear is full of old grease that's just nasty. All that grease needs to come out. I use picks on it like this. I even use just real dental picks to get in there and to scrape everything away. That if you just squirt oil on top of it, you're really not doing yourself any favors. You're just going to cause problems with your machine very shortly down the road. And in here too, you can see where all the linkages moves up and down when you turn the hand wheel. When you raise and lower the presser foot, you can see how everything moves. All of that needs to be clean, and then all of it needs to have oil and grease put on what's appropriate. In here, I use oil. On the worm gear, on the upper horizontal shaft, I use grease. And then on the end bearings, I use oil. And all of the bearings in between, when you move any of the linkages, and get in there with a flashlight so that you can really see it. When you move any of the linkages, all of those pivot spots should have oil and grease on them. I hope this answers some of your questions about lubricating sewing machines and what's really important and why, even though you haven't used them, you're not wearing the oil and grease out. When they sit in the closet for a year or 3 or 10, that old oil, that old grease, just it dries out, it gets hard, it turns into an adhesive. Check out some of my other videos on how to get the most use out of your sewing machine. Thank you now. What I'd like to do today is show you how to wind a bobbin, thread, and get started sewing on a Kenmore 158.19411.